My name is Alexandra Gouta. I'm a journalist, and I welcome all of you to this next session of the Delphi Economic Forum about AI, the algorithmic age, and the social and ethical implications of AI. This is a vast subject, so I'll jump straight into the questions to kick off the conversation with a great researcher, Renee DiResta. Hello, Renee. Welcome to Delphi.
Thank you for having me.
Renee is an associate research professor in the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. She is the author of Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. She is also globally known as one of the top experts in online manipulation, disinformation, scams, and trolls, while she has also advised Congress, the White House, state legislatures, and business organizations on issues related to technology and policy. So, Renee, I'm starting right ahead by asking you, how does AI, and especially Gen AI, change the way propaganda is spread and also the actors who create it, especially in this era we are living? Okay, we've got Trump, we've got Putin, we've got Jinping. And what will propaganda probably look like in the next, let's say, decade?
The next decade. So we've studied propaganda at Stanford Internet Observatory for a very long time, and now at Georgetown McCourt. It's important to understand that it changes as the technology changes, and we've always known this to be true. When radio, when radio emerged, you saw propagandists use it. When television emerged, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's not surprising to see the internet, then social media, and now generative AI. And so I think that I would describe it concisely as it makes propaganda more adaptive, meaning that you can have it far more personalized for an audience. One of the ways that we used to identify inauthentic content, particularly targeting somebody in a particular region, was that the propagandists would get the language wrong. So they would be running bots, but they would just use slang that wasn't native to the community. You would see this particularly if they were targeting subgroups of particular races or particular identity political groups, where they would use terms that would stick out because they were incorrect. With generative AI, that doesn't happen anymore. The language is quite finely tuned according to the people that they want to reach, and so it makes it much harder to tell from that standpoint. Another thing that we see happen is that the propaganda bots are responsive now. So instead of just posting something, they can actually engage in a discourse and a conversation with you. And so that means that that's also a very distinctly different dynamic, where instead of having dumb content that you see, it becomes much more participatory. And I think the second piece is that participatory dynamic, which is that whereas these things used to be controlled very much by state actors who controlled or had access to media in the age of broadcast, in the age of social media and generative AI, those are two very democratized technologies. So anybody can run accounts on social media, anybody can use generative AI to improve persuasive language, and so what you see at the intersection of these things is much more participation from the audience and much more adaptive content that does a better job of targeting people.
And the content farms are multiplying, eh?
Yes.
They are so many nowadays, thousands of them. AI speaks our language now, and we can make a full dialogue with it, as you already mentioned. And it's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's a very powerful tool. So you already mentioned the participatory content creation. This brings me to my next question. During the last few years, we witnessed the power of collective truth. I don't know if you would like to define what is collective truth while answering this question. And also participatory content creation, in which especially Gen Z actively engages. So my question is this a risk for democracy? I mean, it's a tailored truth that is ideologically aligned with what we believe, okay? And how can we cure, is there a cure for this? Because I believe there's no easy cure. I don't know if you have a different opinion.
So the idea of reality as socially determined by all the participants is a very old concept. What happens in the age of social media, though, is that people are moving into much more fragmented realities, and they're defined in large part by ideological the homogeneity, the same people who are part of the same community are very alike each other. So rather than geographically, where you might have your neighbor who is a little bit different from you, or people who are diverse in your community, what you see online is that people are algorithmically sorted into communities where they are very much the same, very, very common, a lot of common identity between them. And one of the things that we see happen as a result is that the reality, the truth that that community comes up with is based in large part on what sources it considers to be good, what politicians it trusts, what other members of the community say to each other. And that often happens without anybody from the outside having a voice or being part of that discussion. It's very insular. And so you have this fragmentation where you can see it quite clearly in the United States. I'll use a very obvious example. Over 30% of the American public still believes that the 2020 election was stolen. Why do they believe that? They believe that because the media that they trust and the leaders that they trust tell them that it was, and they reinforce that belief amongst themselves. And so hearing from an outsider that that isn't true is not very compelling because they're not hearing it from insiders. And so this leads to a significant degree of political tension. And what we've seen even just yesterday was the President of the United States, who's been reelected, issuing executive orders targeting people from his old administration who said things like the 2020 election was not stolen. And so we're seeing that justification, that lie, being used to target people who disagreed. And so that divergent reality has a significant amount of political power behind it now. It's not just some fringe people on the internet with a belief. It's the most powerful, one of the most powerful leaders in the world who is using that lie to exert political power over a target. And so the problem that we have is that question of how do you bridge these things? How do you reduce that power by making it clear that this is a lie, right? By making it obvious that this lie should not be supported. And one of the real challenges there is what are the ways in which we bridge those gaps? And on social media, one of the things that we are looking at is this question of can you move people into spaces where instead of surfacing the most extreme statement of a belief, you surface people who are willing to have a conversation so that the public can see a little bit more of what the two sides of a debate look like or what the two sides of a factual conversation are, in hopes that rather than seeing only the very entrenched propaganda of their niche, they're seeing a much broader spectrum of conversation and discourse and trying to rethink how people get their information and what is curated for them, and are there ways to bridge those gaps by curating differently.
Is this all achievable? I mean, can we do it?
I mean, there's, I think it's a very big challenge, unfortunately. I think that whereas we used to be concerned about propaganda controlled by the state creating this overarching perception where reality comes from the government, and that was very dishonest in a lot of ways. Now you have this other problem, which is that there is no overarching anything, and everything is very, very fragmented, and so that really affects the idea of unity in terms of collective problem solving. How do you have any kind of collective problem solving when you can't agree on the most basic facts? How do you have free and fair elections when people don't believe that the process was legitimate? And that is I think the big danger, and why we need so many people to be paying attention to the problem for what it is.
Thank you. This brings me to my third question. According to Friedrich Nietzsche, convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. I believe that nowadays people are more driven by their convictions than ever before. I mean, we seek for online content, online company even, that is fully aligned with our ideology and our truth. So my question is, in an era of echo chambers, of filter bubbles created by AI also, how can we remain open-minded? Do we have a chance to remain open-minded?
Well, I think in some ways that question of first, can we create it as a value, right? Can you make it something that people strive for? Where being an identitarian is a bad thing, right? Is not something to be proud of. When your entire mode of operating is in your, is in representation of an identity that you need to be representing at all times, an idea that an identity has to be a source of some sort of ideological purity, that I think is very, very bad. And so I do think that a lot of that dynamic that need to be seen as ideologically pure, as some sort of avatar of conviction, when you frame conviction as the ideal, you I think are doing a disservice to the idea that when new information comes along, you change your mind, right? And that I think would actually be the better way for us to think about this. There's a phrase, strong convictions weakly held, right? You can be strong in your beliefs, you can want to act on your beliefs, but you can also change your mind when new information comes to you. And so creating that culture of creating that desire, particularly among younger generations, I think to have an identity that's not so rooted in this is the one thing that I believe, but rather that sense of curiosity, that sense of we should be changing our mind quite often, actually. To model that a little bit more, I think, is actually quite important. I think that is something that leaders can do. Oh, I saw this and then I changed my mind. We got this new information and then we changed our policy. That shift, as opposed to just pretending it never happened. You know, oh, we always thought this, we always did this. No, you didn't. We all know that that's not true. So instead, modeling that dynamic of when new information comes out, we change our beliefs, and that is a good thing, actually.
Great. Maybe curiosity could save the cat sometime in the future. Curiosity maybe could save the cat sometime in the future. How can you prepare the next generation of humans to be critical thinkers, to remain intelligent, to remain smart in an era when AI will probably dominate many of today's human activities and tasks?
So I have 3 children, and they have seen the rise of generative AI just because, you know, it's in my house from what I do, from being a researcher, but I also show them, you know, hey, here is what Midjourney can generate. Let's use it as an example. Here's how we can think about art. Here's how we can ask it to generate images in the style of Delphi or someone, right? And you can watch them. You can use it as a tool of learning. We do the same thing with text, but the emphasis there is always that these are not necessarily reliable. This should be a jumping off point. This should spark your curiosity. You should use this as a learning partner, a debating partner, but not a final output, not a final source. I think that the advances are coming so quickly that it's very hard to say what they're going to be expected to do. And so for me, the way that I've chosen to handle it in our family, and the way that I see colleagues of mine handling it, is to teach them that not to be afraid of it, to treat it as a tool to use, but also not to over-index on it. You don't want to turn off your own creativity and critical thinking and to rely on it as a crutch. So having that as a model of what, you know, a tool for the future, but not something that you should be anchored to. There's a lot of different types of literacy that I think will go along with it. AI literacy is what it's being called right now. Excuse me, where you are trying to think about teaching children that an AI-generated search result may actually not be reliable, and just hitting that point right now. Maybe a few years from now that won't be as necessary, but I think that tailoring the education to where the technology has been very important, and then emphasizing for them also that the creativity that comes from being human is something that they should continue to develop and continue to foster, and that this should only ever be an addition for them, not a replacement.
Are you optimistic that these next generations of humans who are digital natives, Generation A, Generation Beta, if I'm not mistaken,
I don't know what we call
year.
them. Mine are 11, 8, and 4, so I think they maybe span 2 generations. But I am optimistic only because I remember, you know, I was in middle school when the internet became widely democratized, right? When I was able to make a website for the first time, to learn HTML, to go on. I went on to go to school for computer science, but the curiosity and the realization that not only could I create something, but I could reach people, right? It was a very exciting thing for me, even in 5th grade, and I see this with with my children the realization that if they dream something, they can create it. And then I think it has inspired them to develop new skills to supplement that. It's not only enough, the AI generates a picture that's mediocre, they want to then know how to edit images themselves to, to improve it. And so there has been some interest in digital art more broadly, which is nice to see. But I think the optimism comes from just that belief that it's the integration of technology into society in constructive ways that keeps us moving forward. So we're not going to, the genie's not going back in the bottle. We're not going, the technology is here to stay. And so the question is, how do we adapt and use it effectively? How do we think about ways to mitigate the worst effects? Teaching children, this is how political, here is how AI generated propaganda works. Even, you actually can do some pretty cool things using AI to break down arguments. I don't know if anybody has tried this, but you can actually take a pretty bad faith polemic argument and throw it in there and ask ChatGPT or whichever you prefer to break down the argument for you. What is happening here? Where are the areas where there's certain types of rhetoric that are being used that are emotionally manipulative? How do you recognize this as propaganda? It's very, very good at that. It's also very good at identifying conspiracy theories based on small amounts of content. You put something in and it says, oh, this references, and then it will actually connect it back to the bigger, broader theory because it does have that scope. And so I do think that we're seeing interesting ways in which you can use the technology as a tool to help people understand argumentation and rhetoric and manipulation, and to actually use it to surface interesting things, not from a fact-checking perspective, but from a literacy and rhetoric analysis perspective. And once you show people how those tricks work, once you say to them, well, whenever this politician uses the word they, who is they? Who are they talking about? You can actually help people see the tricks. And then once they see the tricks, they don't get fooled again. It's like watching a magician do cards. Once you learn how the trick is done, you're smarter and it doesn't fool you as often. And I think that that's where I find some of the large language models very, very effective actually for breaking down argumentation and for teaching children how to think critically by showing them what flawed thinking looks like.
The whole thing brought in my mind a quote that, if I remember well, is attributed to Noam Chomsky, according to which the world we live in is a very puzzling place, and if we are not willing to be puzzled, then we become the replica of someone else's mind. So I believe we should constantly challenge our minds, we should constantly stretch our minds so that we are able to be fully aware of all these change, all these great opportunities and tremendous challenges that new algorithmic era brings. So, Renee, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And a big thank to all of you for being such an engaged audience.